For part 1 of lesson 2, we are going to be looking at proportion word problems. So the steps to solving proportion word problems are as follows. First thing we're going to do is set up a blank proportion. You can technically solve these problems without using a proportion, and a reminder, this is a proportion, but in my opinion it makes it a little bit easier and less likely to make mistakes. Step 2, we're going to identify the two units that are being discussed or compared in the problem. We're going to label the top row of the proportion, so this top row, one of the units, and label the bottom row, the other unit. The left column, or ratio, is going to be labeled with that initial ratio in the problem. The right column is going to be that end result. And then to note that one of the two spots in that second ratio, that right side column, should contain the unknown variable. That should contain x, because this is what we are solving for. So let's look at problem number 1. If it takes Mike 18 minutes to read 4 pages in a book, how long would it take him to read 10 pages? So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the units given to me in the problem. So we have 18 minutes, so that's going to be my first unit. And then the other one that we have identified is pages. So that is what I'm going to put on the bottom. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to circle those initial numbers given to us. So we have 18 minutes, which minutes went on top, so 18 goes on the top. And we have 4 pages. 4 with pages, pages is on the bottom. Then the other number that's given to us, that third number that's given to us, I'm going to circle that with the corresponding units. 10 pages. So pages was on the bottom, which means 10 goes on the bottom here. That means we are solving for the minutes. And if you look at the question, it says how long. We are solving for how long. Now we've got a proportion that we can solve. I'm going to highlight these diagonals, and we are going to solve the proportion. So the diagonal that has 2 numbers in it is where we are going to multiply. 18 times 10, which equals 180. And then we divide by the number that's in the same diagonal as the variable. So the other diagonal is this pink diagonal. That's the one that has our variable x. So we divide by the number that's in that same diagonal. So we're going to divide by 4. And 180 divided by 4 is 45. Now what were we solving for? 2 places you can look for that. Our x is on top, which matches with minutes. So 45 minutes. Or if you look at the question, it asked how long. That's talking about time. That's talking about minutes. All right, number 2, to make yellow icing, you mix 2 cups of white icing with 9 drops of yellow food coloring. How much yellow food coloring should you mix with 5 cups of white icing to get the same shade? So first thing, I'm identifying my 2 units. So we have, to make this icing, you're mixing 2 cups of white icing. So that's my first unit, is the icing, the white icing, with 9 drops of yellow food coloring. So food coloring is that other unit there. Now I'm going to fill it in. The 2 and the 9 are the 2 initial numbers given to us. And the 2 is referring to the icing. Icing is on top, so I'm going to put 2 on top. The 9 is referring to food coloring. Food coloring's on the bottom, so I'm going to put the 9 on the bottom. The third number that's given to us, if I look in the question, I see 5 cups of what? 5 cups of white icing. So the 5 cups of icing is on top, so 5 is going to go on top, which means we are solving for the food coloring. And if we look at the question, it says how much yellow food coloring. Now we have a proportion that we can solve. So in a proportion, I'm going to highlight my diagonals. And we solve by first picking the 2 numbers that are in the same diagonal. So in our yellow diagonal, we have 2 and we have x. In the pink diagonal, we have 9 and 5. Since the pink has 2 numbers, there's no variable, those are the 2 numbers we're going to multiply by each other. 9 times 5, which is 45, and divide by the number that's in the same diagonal as the variable. So here, the number 2 is in that yellow diagonal with the variable, so we're going to divide by 2. When I do that, 45 divided by 2 is 22 and a half. What were we solving for? So we look at x. What was on the same level as x? Food coloring. If you just write food coloring, that's fine. If you write drops of, that's fine too. The other place you could have found it is you look at the question. How much yellow food coloring is what we were solving for? All right, next problem. The Millers drove 105 miles on 4 gallons of gas. At this rate, how many miles can they drive on 6 gallons of gas? So again, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my 2 units. I see 105 miles, so miles is the first unit I'm going to write in. And I see 4 gallons, so gallons is the next one I'm going to write in. So we've got our 2 initial numbers, 105 and 4. 105 is next to miles. Miles was on top, so 105 goes on top. 4 is next to gallons. Gallons was on the bottom, so 4 goes on the bottom. And then looking for the third number that's given to us. If I look in the question, how many miles can they drive on 6? And the corresponding unit that goes with it, gallons. Gallons is on the bottom here, so I'm going to put 6 on the bottom, which means we are solving for the miles. And if we look at the question, it says how many miles. Now we have a proportion set up that we can solve. I'm going to highlight my 2 diagonals. Picking the diagonal that has 2 numbers in it. So our pink diagonal has 4 and x. Our yellow diagonal has 105 and 6. The diagonal that has 2 numbers, no variables, is the yellow. So 105 times 6 is what I'm going to multiply. When I multiply 105 times 6, I get 630. And then I divide by the number that's in the same diagonal as the variable. So that's our pink diagonal here, that is 4. So I'm going to divide 630 by 4, which gives me 157.5, or 157 and a half. What were we solving for? Well, our x is on top, which means miles. If you weren't sure, look at the question, how many miles? All right, let's look at one more. At Vernon Hills High School, 3 students are in a club for every 5 total students. if there are 1,900 or 1,900 total students at Vernon Hills High School, how many students are in a club? So let's think about what two things we are comparing here. We have 3 students in a club. So that's our first unit, is clubs or students in club. Students in clubs for every 5 total students. So total students is our other unit. So we're comparing those in a club to the total students. All right, let's fill in those initial numbers. We have 3 students are in a club for every 5 total students. So 3 students in a club, club went on top, 3 is going to go on top. 5 total students went on the bottom, 5 goes on the bottom. And then the third number given to us, 1,900, and the corresponding unit after it, total students. So the total students went on the bottom, so 1,900 goes on the bottom, which means our unknown, what we're solving for, is the clubs, which if we look at the question, it says how many students are in a club. Now I'm going to highlight my diagonals. And we're going to solve this proportion. The diagonal that has 2 numbers in it is the yellow diagonal, 3 and 1,900. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 1,900, which equals 5,700. And I'm dividing by the number that's in the same diagonal as the variable. This pink diagonal here has the variable. The number that's in the diagonal is 5. So we divide by 5, and we get 1,140. What were we solving for? Our X is on top. That's talking about students in clubs. So 1,140 students in clubs. And that's it.